Welcome to Older Military Radio TV, where lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. We'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. We are on episode 3 on the real Jack Ryan. We'll learn about how he escaped from the Germans in France when his B-17 is shot from the sky. And with Brother Alexis Bonello.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on this most wonderful series about Jack Ryan. You could call him a Catholic adventurer or hero. And we covered his previous episodes of his early life, how he became a man, joined the American Air Force. Now we're at one of the most decisive points in his life, where he gets shot down over occupied France. And this wasn't the first time he had to bail out of a plane, was it? When he was training.
Yeah. In North Dakota, most of the same crew that he has that in for real also had to bail out of their training B-17. And so now it's for real. Now it's for survival.
Mm-hmm. And in that first plane crash, he lost three of his friends. They were burned alive. Mm-hmm. So this was a very dangerous affair. And Jack wasn't as a good pilot as his friend Mercer, who joined the Canadian Air Force and died. But Jack joined the U.S. Air Forces to follow his friend in admiration. And this is a level of friendship that most young people today have no conception of. And the patriotism of the Ryan families, I'm totally impressed. The son goes off to war. The father joins the FBI. As soon as the war breaks out, they immediately rally. They're like Minutemen in the New England sense. Is in the very minute of the battle, they take their decision, and that is the hallmark of the perfection of patriotism and valor. Yep. And so I can't admit talking about it here at Ordo Militaris Radio TV, where Militaris is the middle name here, military. So Jack's been flying some flights and doesn't have that much experience yet. And the B-17 bombers were a very effective bombing, but without air cover, they could easily be shot down. And the Germans had excellent anti-aircraft positions all over France. So what year we're talking about, what month, and what day was he shot down?
Yeah, so it begins. Jack must have had a strange feeling when he was briefed on his mission for August 16th, 1943. His group of B-17s was to target aircraft component plants at Le Bourget Aerodrome on the northeast side of Paris, the same airfield he had visited during his family's trip to France in 1938. Now he would view it from the air. It was a paradox for the young army officer. He would be bombing the country where he was born, in a place he had been, but with the goal of liberating his own family members. Jack and his crewmates took off from Kimbolton in the Marianne at 7:30 a.m., bound for France with a payload of 9 500-pound bombs. Most of the crew had successfully flown 4 missions together, while Jack, Wayne Rader, and Tom Johnson had known each other since their days in the States. The pilot, Lieutenant Raymond H. Bidwell, originally had been in the crew of the B-17 that had been delayed by engine trouble in Maine. He had flown ahead in another plane and later learned that his B-17 went down in a bad storm off the coast of Ireland. Jack, as the co-pilot, was responsible for much more than just grabbing the controls if the pilot was injured or killed. First off, he had to check a myriad of controls, switches, gauges before even starting the engines. In an era before electronic components, simple functions like priming the engines required working mechanical devices and levers. The co-pilot would also assist with the raising and lowering of the wheels on takeoff and landing, while in the air, keep vigil on the dials monitoring the operation of the plane.
Mhm. So they take off at 7:30 and they cross the channel. That would be a flight of like what, 20 minutes, 30
Yeah.
minutes. What happened?
So the mission wasn't considered to be hazardous as a daytime flight over Germany, but nevertheless, was it a milk run, as airmen referred to missions over largely undefended targets? Weather was good at the bomber as the bombers arrived over Le Bourget about 9:30 a.m. In fact, Lieutenant Colonel Woolridge of the 379th reported the best weather I've seen to date. The Marion unloaded its bombs at 20,000 feet and reported a direct hit on the oil storage facility. There was little time to celebrate as German Messerschmitt's 109 fighters came up fast from behind and below with guns blazing. The first barrage of enemy machine guns hit one of the Marianne's engines, causing it to catch fire and shut down. A 20 millimeter shell then exploded in the radio room, setting it ablaze and leaving the plane crippled. With its tail guns and its plane and electrical system disabled, Bildwold ordered Jack and the radio operated Tech Sergeant Victor R. Gibquer, Gibquer to bail out at 18,000 feet. With the communications equipment knocked out, Bidwell then crawled down to the nose hatch to repeat the order to the bombardier radar and navigator, Lieutenant Mario W. Sony Del Rey Jr. Jack made his way from the cockpit toward the back of the crippled plane to alert other crew members, and as Gilbert Queer was leaving through the bomb bay doors, which had remained in an open position after the explosion. The plane's altitude had dropped to 17,000 feet by the time Jack jumped, and as he fell to 7,000 before opening his parachute. And as he jerked to slow descent, he looked down to see Gipqueer shoot, then upward just as the Marianne was racked by an explosion. The bomber went into a tailspin, picking up speed as it spiraled, until finally plunging into the countryside south of Paris in the eruption of flames and debris.
Jack was smart. You notice he jumps at 17,000, but he doesn't open his parachute to 7,000. And that's forward from being strafed or freezing to death in the cold air at that altitude.
Yeah.
How many men survived this? And were any of them injured upon landing?
Gilbert Queer, he had he messed up the wrist like I did.
Yeah.
And him, Jack and Radar had a little few bumps and bruises, but nothing major. But uh, to help them keep them safe, the underground kept them in a hospital and protected them. And
Yeah. Well, they were shot down like what, at 10 in the morning. And so that would be broad daylight. Why weren't they captured? What did they do to evade capture? We know anything about that?
so the soldiers showed the gear to the French at the scene, laughing as he imitated the Mae West and offered to give the boots to whoever found Jack. So that was the German soldiers when they found the chutes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he found a hole and he burrowed himself deep into that hole while the Germans are around and seeing the parachutes and talking to the locals.
Mm-hmm.
He was there for 2 hours. He listened to the crowd who remained at the site, curious to see if the Germans would capture the Yank. Suddenly, a French teen caught German's attention. "I'll find the parachutist," he yelled and came running in the direction of the hole. Jack drew his service revolver, thinking he could frighten the young man into keeping quiet. Luckily, the teen's confidence in his tracking abilities was misplaced, and he missed Jack by 10 feet as he ran into the woods. Nobody bothered to follow.
Yeah, so the European countryside does all these little holes and hollows for livestock to stay in on a hot summer's day or things like that. So if you know the countryside, well, but if you don't, you wouldn't see it. So that was providential.
So, so a short time later, the exasperated Germans pulled the parachute from the tree and left the area. Jack remained in the hole for 4 more hours, listening to the sounds of French residents traveling up and down the road. Two men stopped near him at one point, with one asking the other which direction the parachutist had gone. Jack didn't like the tone of the conversation and chose to remain hidden rather than to ask them for help. By 5 p.m., the area had grown quiet and suspected that both the French and the Germans had become more concerned with their supper than with finding him. Um,
Okay, that was very prudent. Hmm. So what does Jack do now? Dusk is falling.
yeah, so this is what he used to keep alive and also what he did. Downed airmen weren't without resources. When they parachuted into France, the U.S. Army provided them with kits to aid their attempts to evade, capture, and make their way to safety. The kits included chocolate, chewing gum, Byzantine for fatigue, that's speed for the day,
Caffeine.
water purification tablets, matches, adhesive tape, and a water bottle. In addition, they carried a purse with a compass, a map, a file, photograph of themselves used with forged documents, and about $50 worth of francs. Jack threw away most of the supplies and burned the map, which would have identified him as an American, confident that he could navigate the countryside without them. With his perfect understanding of French, he also had no need for the language guard that provided down airmen with key words and phrases that might be useful. Um, so wartime makes for some strange twists of fate. Was well aware of his. He had jumped from his burning B-17 and landed not far from Paris, just 50 miles from the home of his grandparents,
Okay.
Georgia Lucille Leconte. In fact,
Okay. So
yeah,
was Jack tempted?
yeah. In fact, he could have followed the nearby Seine east to their home in Login to north to Paris, which he had visited with his family just 5 years earlier. Like all U.S. airmen, Jack received training that included lectures on avoiding capture, evasion, and escape from German jails and POW camps. But like others who had been down behind enemy lines, he realized immediately that there had been no lesson plan to prepare for everything that lay ahead. He hid his holster under the brush and began to walk with his jacket draped over the pistol in his hand. He was intent on using the weapon if he encountered the enemy, since the soldiers he had seen earlier were older and likely to run if he began shooting. He kept his dog tags, identifying him as a U.S. serviceman. Since discarding them, he meant he could be charged as a spy if he were not in uniform. So, yeah.
And so what does he do? Does he make for Paris, or does he try to find his friends who bailed out?
So Jack found a path inside the woods and proceeded cautiously, where that sentry might have been posted, but the Germans had chosen to position their men only along the paths leading into and out of the trees, not inside. Beginning of his hunt for refuge, he progressed slowly. For the first 2 miles, he moved no more than 10 yards at a time before stopping to listen for voices nearby, and he stayed in either the undergrowth or on paths with cobwebs and weeds that indicated they had not been recently traveled. At one point, he reached a clearing that would allow him to walk more quickly, but he said chose to take an old path around. And so then he found the emerged. He gathered himself and emerged to greet the man in French. And the revolver drawn but concealed, the man looked him over calmly and seemed to know that he was down airman he had caused the uproar earlier in the day. He said, "I'm an American," Jack said. "Are there any Germans nearby?" The Frenchman said there weren't, so Jack pressed him for information, asking the distance to the nearest town, the frequency of German patrols, and whether any of his crewmates from the Mary Ann had been captured. He asked one last question: "What would you do if you were in my place?" The Frenchman at first seemed to be at loss, but then he directed Jack to wait while he talked to someone who might help. So he trusted. So while Jack mostly trusted the woodcutter, he nevertheless followed him for about 50 yards as he walked away and hid where he could have a good view when the man returned, just in case he was accompanied by a German. And a short time later, the woodcutter appeared with another Frenchman who said he owned a nearby hotel. Both men seemed eager to help, and they instructed him to wait in the woods until they returned with food.
Wonderful Frenchman.
So then, the assistance from the two was a tremendous relief since the French had little reason to help down airmen. German posters warned all men who aid directly or indirectly the crews of the enemy aircraft shot down or having made a forced landing will be shot in the field. Women who render the same type of aid will be sent to the concentration camps in Germany. And as an incentive, anyone assisting in the capture or of the flyers could receive $250 or more in francs, enough to keep one's family from starving. Jack spent the night in the woods. The woodcutter, his wife, and his daughter arrived the next day with more food. In the evening, the woodcutter and the hotel owner brought Jack to the banks of the Seine, where teenage brothers Roland and Claude Papoint rowed him across and led him to their home in the Corbeil Essonnes, less than 20 miles from the center of Paris. The boy's father was a retired salesman for an English typewriter company, and their mother, Suzanne, was a midwife who used their home for birthing local women. Jack spent 2 days and nights in one of the rooms of the modest maternity hospital before receiving a visit from a local resistance leader who gave the name Oudet.
The French were quite organized. They knew exactly where to lead this guy to and who didn't trust him to. So it's
Yeah.
been now three days. He hasn't any word of his friends. What
No.
happens?
So then after several days at the maternity hospital, Jack received some surprising news from Houdet. Wayne Rader had survived the attack on the Mary Ann and was at a nearby home. Rader's escape had been even more miraculous than Jack's. While Jack had made a clean jump away from the plane, Bombardier Radar and navigator Sony Del Rey had been pinned to the floor to the nose escape hatch as the B-17 went into the spin. They didn't have the luxury of jumping. The B-17 exploded as it began to plummet, throwing both the men out into the sky. Peter had been battered by the blast, suffering lacerations to both hands and his face. The Oregon native blacked out for a few seconds, but recovered his senses quickly enough to pull his ripcord at 1,000 feet, just in time to make a hard landing in a clearing that offered little means of concealment. He sprained his wrist and an ankle when he hit ground, though Ray landed nearby with even worse results. He lay on top of a chute with a broken leg and couldn't move.
What luck that when the explosion that would free them from the crashing plane.
Yeah.
So four
Radar,
men survived.
yeah. So Radar tried to help him. Del Rey told him, try to get away. He really had no choice but to abandon his crewmate, who obviously would have been an impediment to a quick escape. In addition, airmen in need of medical care presented a special risk because the Germans kept a close eye on drug supplies and took notice of a doctor making frequent visits to a home. Jack and Radar were the lucky ones aboard the Mary Ann. Three crewmates were killed when the plane was shot down, including ball turret gunner Tom Johnson, whom Jack first met in Boise and trained with in Rapid City. Pilot Ray Bidwell, who 2 months earlier had the good fortune to miss a flight that had gone down in North Atlantic, died in the crash of the Mary Ann. Del Rey, Gebitker, and three others who parachuted to safety were captured and sent to prisoner of war camps. Rader left his equipment behind and headed toward a nearby wooded area when a German ME-109 screamed down on him with his machine guns blazing. He dodged from tree to tree as the fighter fired on him until it pulled up, again circling over Del Rey to signal to soldiers on the way. Rader was walking in a plowed field about 400 yards away when a German vehicle pulled up, and he continued toward a group of Frenchmen who had gathered to watch the injured airman's capture. Before he reached them, he noticed a German cycling, eyeing him suspiciously. So he bent to pick up a handful of soil, examined it. The German turned away, apparently convinced by the simple ruse that the airman was a local farmer.
That's very intelligent.
So Jack, Radar, and the guides arrived back at the maternity hospital, entered through the back door, just as a German soldier was leaving through the front.
It's
So,
angels watching over these guys.
yeah. So at the home front, Bonnie Ryan, the wife of Jack, got a telegram from Washington about 8 days after saying they were down in France. It read, regret to inform you that the commanding general, European Area, reports your husband, Second Lieutenant Jack E. Ryan, missing in action over Le Bourget, France since 16 August. If further details or information of his status are received, you'll be promptly notified.
She must have been devastated by that.
She she relayed the news to Ed and Georgette, and they called George. And and while Ed seemed resigned to the likelihood that Jack had died, he wrote that Bonnie and Georgette were hopeful that he will turn up later, that he might be hidden away by the French. Georgette found added reassurance as she regularly hosted French expatriates in Minneapolis. The word quickly spread to friends and neighbors.
Hmm.
So his mom contacted the expatriates. The expatriates somehow got a hold of other people over there to make sure.
Mhm. Probably through embassies in South America or something.
So, so now all that was going on back home. Jack and Wayne Radar remained at the maternity hospital in Corbeil-Essonnes for 6 weeks from mid-August until the end of September 1943. Jack was mostly at ease during the stay, but he noticed Radar's growing discomfort with spending so much time surrounded by people whose language he didn't understand.
That is, it's annoying if you don't understand it. It drives you crazy because it's like total social isolation. But how did they hide themselves away in a maternity hospital for 6 weeks and not get noticed?
Yeah. So, um, so the Gestapo had trained men to appear at rich French homes dressed in American and British uniforms after Allied planes had been shot down, hoping the residents would take them in and reveal the workings of the resistance. While both the invaders and their helpers had no choice but to trust each other, some ways neither could ever feel completely safe. None of the Germans promoted treachery on both sides. Jack spent part of the time using binoculars to watch Germans' army maneuvers across the scene while Rader concentrated on recuperating from his injuries. The length of their wait was indicative of both the success of the resistance and the hazards of its work. In the early days of the war, it was rare for Allied airmen to be shot down and make his way back to England, but by 1943, the escape routes established to France northwestern coastline, at Brittany in the British held Gibraltar, with safe houses in Belgium, and France and Spain had raised airmen's odds of finding refuge when they parachuted in occupied territory. So, let's see here. So then, yeah. Yeah, then we get into a little bit of deceit. In January 1943, Roger the New View of Roger the Legionnaire volunteered his services, recruiting new members to assist in the Pat Line escape network. At the beginning of the war, the New View had been part of the French Gestapo, turned him into a double agent to be used as their tool in the counter espionage. The New View, who had served with the French Foreign Legion, offered to recruit new members for the resistance and gain further inside access as he began helping to convey downed airmen to safety. Eventually, the Review began turning over names to the Gestapo and exposed the workings of the Pat Line, the escape network named for its chief who had taken the alias of Pat O'Leary. The Legionnaires' deceit resulted in the arrest of most of the network's leaders in Paris, along with many of their operatives, as the crackdown spread to other cities. The entire network had to be dismantled because the resistance leaders no longer knew whom to trust as their members were brought in for questioning under torture. The shutdown of the Pat line resulted in a serious slowdown in the movement of downed Allied aviators while the new networks were established. Jack and Rader finally became encouraged when the resistance members came to the hospital to get back their service pistols and provide money, rations, and train tickets. The return of the guns was a sign that the resistance had received word from London that they could be of help, particularly someone with Jack's background and fluency in French. Odette arrived on September 30th and introduced the airmen to a young woman named Paulette Desmy, alias Jeannette. Susan Papoint drove her and the two airmen to the train depot in Corbeil-Essonne, arriving just ahead of the next train bound for Paris, so they wouldn't have to linger at the station. With no identification papers, Jack and Radar mimicked the appearance of Frenchmen, hurrying past Gestapo and police to reach the train, as if it were their daily routine in commuting to work in Paris. Jack felt more comfortable when they arrived in Paris. Despien took the Americans to a sixth-floor apartment in the southwest part of the city, not far from the hotel where the Ryan family had stayed.
Wow, what daring. They went right past the Gestapo.
So yeah, so and it gets into all the stuff they had him do. Look at things and go spy on things.
Now, so this was Jack's first experience with intelligence work and
Yeah,
undercover work. And he eventually gets back to Britain, doesn't he?
yeah.
And
So and I mean it just goes on and on. It's day
this
after
is a
day.
fascinating. You got to get a copy of this book, everyone. This is a
Yeah.
fascinating read, and I highly recommend it. So in your family, you could read this out loud at nighttime with the television turned off, and the lights turned down, and everyone thinking about what they're hearing. A wonderful way of doing some family entertainment that's wholesome
So
and inspiring.
by the afternoon of the next day, the shore of the southwest coast of England came into view, and the Royal Navy patrol boat approached. The Susan Renee, with Jack Ryan aboard, was towed into the harbor at Penzance about 5 p.m. on Sunday, October 24th. A telegram arrived at Victor and Beatrice Niven's home in the southeast Minneapolis 3 days later. Bonnie opened it and read, "Dear Bonnie, I'm okay, feeling well. Do not worry. Give love to all. Mail some address here. Love, Jack Ryan."
Does it say what her reaction was?
After she had finished spreading the exciting news to friends and family, she pasted the telegram into Jack's service scrapbook. Underneath it, she wrote, "A gift from God."
April 24th was the vigil of St. Louis, King of France.
Yep. So, in the next episode is the debriefing of Jack and Radar, and they tell the OSS and everything of what they saw and German positions and everything. And
Mhm.
So that one
That's
might be a little bit longer episode with all the details.
It's absolutely fascinating that he survived that. That's real character formation event. Thank goodness he was fluent in French and knew about how to comport yourself in France.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't know those things, you'd stand out like a sore thumb.
Yep.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on this episode of Jack Ryan and his being shot down over France and the amazing adventure he had escaping.
Yep. And this book is linked on the show page for the US audience of the American Amazon and then UK Amazon for those in UK and Europe. So please get a copy. And again, thank you to Mr. Sullivan for giving us full permission and use of the book. And I guarantee you, what we come up with about his stuff in Vietnam, doesn't blow your mind.
Yes, we have been investigating.
So this is Automobile Terrace Video TV signing off. Yes, well.
This will